A single scream rose out of the storm that day, a sound sharp enough to stop even the desert wind. And there, on the ragged edge of Mogollon Ridge, a 6-year-old boy in an oversized white shirt stood between life and death. His name was Eli Caldwell, small as a coyote pup, forgotten by both the settlers and the Apache, until the moment he reached for a cradle board, being swallowed by the flood and changed the frontier forever. What happened after that rescue would expose a truth men had killed to bury, one that could burn the whole territory to the ground or bind two broken worlds at last. Before we ride deeper into this tale, make sure to hit subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Stay with me to the final breath of this storm, the part no one ever sees coming. The storm came tearing over Mogollon Ridge like a wild animal let loose from heaven. Yellow lightning splitting the sky, wind whipping the pines until they screamed. And out in all that fury, a little boy no bigger than a sack of grain fought to stay upright on the narrow trail. Eli Caldwell, 6 years old, barefoot, swallowed by an oversized white shirt that flapped around him like a torn sail. His hair stuck out in wind-matted tangles, and the hem of his shirt, ripped, dirty, hanging past his knees, slapped against his legs as he stumbled forward. He hadn't meant to wander so close to the ridge. He'd only come looking for the goat that usually slept beside him. But now the storm raged so loud he could barely hear his own breath. The desert felt angry that day, like it wanted to erase everything on it, including a small boy nobody watched over. Then a sound cut through the roar, thin, sharp, not wind, not thunder, a cry, a baby's cry. Eli froze. His heart thudded hard enough to shake the bones in his chest. He crept toward the edge, pushing his tangled hair out of his eyes. Below him, where the storm-swollen flood smashed through the canyon, something bobbed in the foaming water. A cradle board, Apache-made, swaddled in colorful weave and spinning helplessly in the current. A tiny arm flailed once, then vanished beneath the churn. Thunder cracked overhead, sending grit into Eli's face. The cradle board lurched toward the cliff, where the river dropped clean into a jagged fall. One breath. Maybe two. That was all the baby had. A shadow moved on the far ridge, broad shoulders, a long coat, and the unmistakable, slow, certain stride of a man who didn't fear anything. Eli caught no face, just the shape leaving the scene without a backward glance. Something cold crawled down Eli's neck. Someone had meant for that cradle board to die. Another cry, weaker this time, snapped him back. Eli looked down at himself. Small hands, trembling legs, soaked shirt hugging him like a wet rag. No one was coming. No grown-up, no settler, no Apache warrior. Just him. He had barely survived 6 winters, but one thing he knew as sure as dust. If he didn't try, that baby was gone. He scrambled to a juniper tree hanging crooked over the ledge. His belt, a thin strip of rawhide someone had tied around his middle to keep the huge shirt from slipping off, was the only rope he had. His fingers were too small to make a knot the way grown men did, but he managed to loop the belt twice around a thick branch and yank it tight. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough. But it had to be. The wind shoved him sideways, almost knocking him off his feet. Eli sucked in a shaky breath, then stepped off the ledge. His body dropped. The belt snapped tight, biting his ribs so hard tears shot into his eyes. He swung wildly, boots skidding against wet rock. Below him, the river roared loud enough to swallow screams. The cradle board spun closer to the drop. Eli stretched down, arms shaking. The belt creaked above him. Water slapped his face, cold and hard. He reached again, fingers brushing wood, and missed. Lightning cracked so bright the world turned white. Eli kicked off the rock, letting his weight swing him lower. The belt tore a little. He didn't hear it, only felt the sudden slack. His stomach lurched as he dropped another foot. The cradleboard hit a whirlpool, spun, then slid toward the very edge of the cliff. He lunged. This time, his fingers hooked the rawhide straps. The cradleboard jerked. His shoulder nearly tore from its socket. The river tried to drag the cradleboard away. The belt tried to yank him back. For a moment, Eli's tiny body stretched between sky and flood like a scrap of fabric about to rip in two. He screamed through clenched teeth and hauled the cradleboard against his chest. The belt snapped. Eli fell with the cradleboard locked in his arms. They hit the water so hard his breath vanished. The cold grabbed him like claws, pulling him down into dark, thrashing currents. He kicked desperately, the oversized shirt tangling around his legs, dragging him deeper. His hands, somehow, still clung to the cradleboard. He forced his eyes open. A pale little face floated inches from his, shivering, blue-tinged, eyes squeezed shut. Alive. Barely. A broken branch slammed into Eli's side and shoved him toward the far bank. He clawed at it with one hand, still hugging the baby with the other. The branch wedged between rocks, and Eli, gasping, heaved the cradleboard onto a flat boulder. He scrambled after it, coughing river water, shaking from cold and exhaustion. The storm kept howling, rain stinging like shot pellets. But Eli didn't move. He pulled the cradleboard to his chest and curled around it, using his oversized shirt as a shield. The baby whimpered. Eli pressed his forehead against the tiny, damp cheek and breathed a promise he didn't know he had in him. "I got you." Then, far off through the rain, a new sound rose from the hills. Not thunder, not wind, hoofbeats. Many. Eli's heart dropped into his stomach. Someone was coming, and whoever had tossed this cradleboard wasn't finished with the story yet. The hoofbeats grew louder, steady, purposeful, the kind that belonged to men who didn't wander by accident. Eli clutched the cradleboard tighter, forcing himself upright, despite the trembling in his legs. The storm thinned to a cold drizzle, mist coiled between the pines like ghosts waking up. And through that mist, 3 riders emerged first, then 5, then more. Silent, painted, watchful. Apache. The lead rider swung down without a word. He wasn't young, but not old either. Hard-lined face, black braids tied tight against the rain, a knife at his hip that had seen real killing. His gaze flicked from Eli to the cradleboard, and something sharp and dangerous lit his eyes. He gave a command low in his throat, and in an instant, 2 warriors seized Eli, not roughly, but firmly, like handling a trap that might still snap shut. Eli twisted, a small, soaked, mud-covered creature in a shirt that hung off him like a ghost's robe. He didn't fight for himself. He fought for the tiny weight in his arms. "Don't take him," he gasped, voice hoarse from river water. One of the warriors hesitated at the sound, maybe at the size of the boy, or the strange courage in such a small body. But the leader stepped forward, lifted the cradleboard from Eli's grasp, and froze. The silver medallion tied to the cradleboard, half buried under wet weave and mud, gleamed like a shard of moon. His breath caught, his jaw locked, and he snapped an order so sharp the other warriors stiffened as if struck. The riders closed in around Eli, forming a tight circle of hooves and mud and silent verdicts. A blanket was thrown over his shoulders, rough wool smelling of smoke, and the next moment Eli found himself hauled onto the back of a horse. A warrior mounted behind him, gripping him in place. The cradleboard was carried separately, with a kind of awe, or fear. The storm faded entirely, as they rode into a narrow canyon Eli hadn't known existed. High walls shut out most daylight, and the horses moved as if guided by memory older than the trail itself. The deeper they went, the more the world changed. Footsteps on gravel, firelight flickering against stone, the low murmur of women and elders hidden among junipers and overhangs. Hidden Valley Camp. Eli was lowered onto the ground before he could make sense of anything. A circle formed around him, warriors, mothers, with children clinging to their skirts, elders wrapped in coyote hides, all staring. Not one face softened, not one voice welcomed him. He felt small, smaller than ever, with his shirt dripping onto the dirt and mud streaking his shins. But he pulled the blanket tighter and lifted his chin the way his mother used to tell him when men in town looked at him like he didn't belong. The cradleboard was placed before an elderly woman who walked toward it with a limp. Her name was spoken in hushed tones. Nalina. Her fingers, knotted from age, brushed the weave as if reading a story only she understood. When she uncovered the baby's face, the camp inhaled all at once. A child of their blood, a child of a high family, a child who should never have been found in a river. The leader, the same man who had taken the cradleboard, began speaking in Apache, voice controlled but burning underneath. Eli didn't understand the words, but he understood the emotion. Fury, grief, suspicion. A word came up again and again, pointed at him like a knife. Bilagana. White boy. Nalina turned to study Eli. Her stare was long and quiet, as if she were searching for ghosts in his face. She reached out, brushed his tangled hair aside, and her eyes narrowed on the thin strip of leather tied near his collar. His father's old knot, simple but distinct. She whispered to the leader. The leader stiffened. A ripple of murmurs skittered around the circle. Eli didn't know why. He only knew the world had become very, very still. A sharp whistle cut through the crowd as a young warrior approached carrying something in his hands. A rattlesnake, head severed, but body still twitching. He pointed to Eli. The implication was clear. The snake had been found, coiled near the cradleboard on the riverbank, beaten away by a child's sandal and a tiny hand that should have run, not stood its ground. More murmurs, louder. Half the camp turned toward Eli again, not with anger now, but disbelief. The leader barked a new order. Eli was pulled up, pushed forward, and forced to stand beside the cradleboard. The baby stirred, let out a thin cry, and the moment the sound reached Eli's ears, his small hand instinctively reached toward it, protective, trembling, honest. A silence deeper than the canyon itself fell over the valley. Nalina stepped to Eli's side, placing a wrinkled hand lightly on his shoulder. An act subtle as a whisper, but powerful enough that even the fiercest warriors paused. She spoke, her voice cracking like old cedar. This little one shielded my blood. He did not flee the storm. He did not flee the snake. A spirit that guards is not a spirit of lies. The leader's face worked with conflicting emotions, duty, pain, suspicion, but the silver medallion hanging from the cradleboard pulled him into a decision he couldn't avoid. He crouched before Eli, eye level with a boy half his size, but holding more defiance than any grown man he'd known. "You carry a truth," he said in accented English, each word heavy. "And truth walks dangerous trails," he pointed at the baby. "You take him, you keep him alive, until we know who tried to end his bloodline." Gasps rippled across the gathered crowd. A few protested. A few spit into the dust. A few stared in disbelief at the child who barely reached their waists. But the decision was made, and the warriors obeyed. A small bundle, water, bread, a strip of jerky, was pressed into Eli's hands. The cradleboard was strapped to him, its weight almost tipping him forward. His knees buckled, but he steadied himself. One more command rang out. A single warrior slipped into the shadows, assigned to follow Eli unseen, guardian, witness, judge. Then the camp parted. Eli, drenched, shivering, terrified but stubborn as a mountain weed, walked out with the cradle board on his back. Behind him, the Apache watched in heavy silence. Ahead of him, the canyon stretched like a mouth ready to swallow both children whole. The storm had passed, but the danger had just begun. The canyon closed behind Eli with a hush so complete it felt like the whole valley had stopped breathing, watching that small figure disappear into the dusk. He didn't look back. Maybe he was afraid they'd change their minds. Maybe he knew if he hesitated even a heartbeat, his courage would crack like dry cedar. The cradle board on his back weighed more than his own body, but he clutched its straps with both hands and forced his feet to move along the narrow ledge. Shadows stretched long between the rocks. The rain had passed, but the air still held the bite of something unfinished. Eli's wet shirt clung cold to his ribs, heavy and stiff from mud. Each step kicked up dust that stuck to his legs like rust. The baby behind him stirred once, a weak rustle of cloth. Eli whispered, "It's okay. We're going. Just hold on," though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. The canyon forked into a wider wash as night bled slowly over the desert. Far out on the flats, something glinted, metal catching the last sliver of dying light. Eli froze. A rider, alone, far enough not to make out a face, but too straight-backed, too sure, too patient to be a traveler. The moment Eli blinked, the figure nudged his horse and slipped behind a ridge. The hair on Eli's arms rose. Someone knew he'd left that Apache valley. Someone was waiting. He tightened his grip on the cradleboard's straps and hurried into the wash. Pebbles rolled under his bare feet, cutting skin, but he didn't slow. The desert carried sound strangely after rain. Every hoofbeat, every distant clatter echoed like danger sneaking between the stones. Eli glanced over his shoulder again. Nothing. But nothing was sometimes worse. The path twisted into a place the Apache called the Whisper Cut, a narrow cleft where wind moaned even without a storm. Eli squeezed through sideways, the cradleboard scraping against both walls. Halfway in, he heard it, a soft clink of metal behind him. Spur metal, not Apache. And footsteps too heavy to be his shadow guardian. He pressed himself flat to the sandstone, breathing as quietly as a rabbit in high grass. The man, a silhouette broad as a barn door, walked past the cleft's mouth and paused. Eli held his breath. The man's coat was long, dark, the kind stitched for travel and violence. When he turned his head toward the canyon, the wind carried the faint rattle of something hanging from his belt. It made Eli's blood chill. A chain of tags, trophies, or names of the dead. The man lifted something to his face, maybe sniffing the air, maybe listening, and then muttered a curse that scraped the canyon walls. His voice was thick, rough, like gravel in a tin cup. He kicked his horse once and rode on, not in haste, but in that slow, deliberate way of someone who knew exactly how this hunt would end. Only when the hoofbeats faded did Eli slip out of the cleft. His legs trembled so hard he had to grab a rock to steady himself. He'd seen killers before, men who drank more than they spoke and shouted at shadows. But this man felt different. Cold, organized, patient like a wolf, but smarter, more dangerous. The Apache warrior tailing Eli remained invisible, though the boy felt his presence now like a second shadow. If the warrior hadn't stepped in earlier, perhaps Eli wouldn't have lived long enough to reach the Whisper Cut. The thought didn't comfort him. It only made the night feel deeper. He kept moving, guided by the faint glow of starlight breaking through shredded clouds. After a long while, the canyon spat him out onto a rise overlooking the open desert. Flat land stretched ahead, moonlit, rippled, empty. Crossing it would be like walking across a rifleman's table. Behind him, the baby whimpered. Not loud, but enough to carry. Eli crouched behind a boulder and gently rocked the cradle board, whispering the only song his mother ever sang, a wordless hum about rivers and sun-warmed stones. Slowly the baby settled. Across the flats, a lone lantern flickered into view. Not the rider from before. A camp. Someone was waiting out there, fire low, lantern hooded. Whoever it was had chosen a place where any traveler would be seen, long before getting close. Eli's stomach nodded. Men who hid their fires were rarely men he wanted to meet. He backed away, heart pounding. His mind raced in a frantic tumble, left toward the ravine, right toward the spine ridge, maybe climb the rocks and hope the baby didn't cry again. But every escape route ended in the same truth. He couldn't outrun a grown man on a horse, not barefoot, not dragging a cradle board twice his weight. He swallowed hard and whispered, "I'll find a way. I promise." Wind hissed across the sand like a warning rattlesnake. He wasn't sure if the desert was agreeing with him or laughing at him. A soft rustle behind him made Eli spin. The tall Apache warrior stepped out of the darkness at last, face painted, bow unstrung, eyes shining with a kind of grim patience. He didn't speak at first. He just studied Eli the way a scout studies signs in the dirt. Then, in low English, he said, "You must keep moving. The man behind you. He is not alone." Eli stared. "Who is he?" The warrior's jaw tensed. "A hunter of our blood. And yours." Cold fear slid through the boy, but the warrior bent close, voice softening just enough to be human. "You are small, but small things survive storms that break strong men. Remember that." He stepped back into shadow, vanished as if swallowed by the night. Eli tightened his hold on the cradle board and turned toward the distant ridgeline. The desert ahead looked endless, but staying still was death. He took a breath, then another, and forced his feet forward. "Before we go deeper into this chase, and trust me, it only gets sharper from here. This is a good time to join the channel if you're riding with the story so far. It helps more folks discover these frontier tales, and I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Now, back to the trail." Somewhere out there, a hunter was drawing closer. And Eli Caldwell, 6 years old, and wearing a shirt 5 sizes too big, walked straight into the dark, with a life strapped to his back. Night deepened as Eli pushed toward the ridge, each step heavier than the last. The warrior's warning still echoed inside him, tightening around his ribs like a rope. Somewhere out in the desert, that hunter was closing the distance, and Eli knew the open flats wouldn't protect him much longer. So he angled toward the only place that offered cover, the black mouth of the Mine of Echoes, a place folks whispered about but never entered after dark. The ridge rose like a broken tooth above the land, and the mine yawned just beneath it, a wound carved into the rock. Most grown men avoided it even in daylight. To Eli, it felt like stepping into the belly of something ancient. But danger behind meant danger ahead didn't matter. He tightened the cradleboard straps across his little shoulders and slipped inside. The cave swallowed sound. Even his breathing felt muffled. Cool air brushed his skin, carrying the scent of iron and damp earth. As he crept deeper, the darkness thickened into something nearly solid, until a flicker of orange glowed around a bend. A lantern. Someone was in here. Eli crouched low, heart thudding like a trapped bird. He edged closer until the silhouette of a man took shape. Thin, bearded, shoulders hunched as though folded by years of hiding. The man turned at the faint scrape of Eli's foot. The lantern lit the hollows of his face, and for a moment the world held its breath. "Eli!" His voice cracked in disbelief, soft and broken like an old hinge. Eli froze. The name hit him harder than the river ever had. "Pa!" Jonas Caldwell staggered forward, eyes wide with something between joy and shame. His clothes were torn, coated in dust, and a rusted shackle hung broken around one ankle. He looked like a man who'd run from ghosts so long he'd become one. He dropped to his knees and cupped Eli's face with both hands. "You're alive. Lord above, you're alive." But the moment his gaze slipped to the cradle board, his shoulders stiffened. "Where'd you get—" A metallic click echoed from deeper inside the mine, then another. Bootsteps, unhurried, confident. Jonas's expression hardened. "They followed you." Eli nodded, feeling suddenly very small. "A man with chains. He's coming." Jonas sucked in a tight breath. Silas Vorn. He said it like a curse. The baby behind Eli whimpered. Jonas swallowed whatever fear flickered in his eyes and shifted into motion, fast for a man who looked half dead. He snuffed the lantern and ushered Eli deeper into the tunnels, guiding him by memory alone. The mine twisted into narrow arteries of stone. Old ore carts stood abandoned on rusted rails, tools scattered where miners had dropped them years back. The deeper they went, the more the air vibrated with faint echoes, the reason locals called it the Mine of Echoes. Every step bounced back like the footsteps of someone unseen. Jonas crouched beside a cart, whispering urgently, "That man hunts Apache for money. He hunts anyone with truth in their pockets. And he hunts me most of all." His voice shook. "Eli, I didn't leave you because I didn't care. I left because any man near me died." Before Eli could answer, a voice drifted down the passage, low, scraping, almost amused. "Jonas, you sure can run. Shame you brought the boy back into this." Silas Vorn. The lantern he carried painted the tunnel walls with wide, swinging shadows. His coat was dusted with grit, his hat dripping cave drips. But he moved with the same slow confidence as a man walking to supper. Jonas grabbed Eli's shoulder. "Go, hide in the side tunnel. Don't come out unless you hear me call." Eli didn't move. "But Pa!" Jonas's voice cracked like a whip. "Now!" Eli slipped into the narrow break in the wall, pressing the cradle board to his chest. Through the sliver of darkness, he could see his father step out onto the rails, one hand braced on a support beam. Jonas didn't look strong, but he stood straight, as though the mine had lent him its backbone. Vorn's boots thudded closer. "You cost me a lot of money, Jonas. Folks don't like loose threads when they're paying for a tidy story." Jonas spat. "You murdered an Apache mother and pinned it on another tribe. I saw you. I saw everything." Vorn shrugged. "Most folks don't care who bleeds as long as the papers say the right names." Jonas's hand slid behind him, gripping the handle of an old pickaxe. "You're not touching the children." Vorn stopped. Stilled. "Children?" he repeated slowly. A smile crept across his face, thin and cold. "So, the little cradle survived after all." He cocked his revolver. Jonas swung the pickaxe in a wide arc, metal singing through the tunnel. The blow knocked the pistol out of Vorn's hand and sent it skidding across the rails. Vorn lunged, slamming Jonas into the support beam so hard dust rained from the ceiling. The baby cried. Eli's heart clenched. Vorn heard it too. His head turned, eyes narrowed. "There you are." Eli stumbled back. Jonas roared and threw himself at Vorn, tackling him onto the rails. They struggled, two desperate animals in the half-dark, kicking up stones, rattling the mine's old bones. Eli's gaze darted to the ore cart beside him, heavy, perched on a slope, held only by a rusty brake pin. His hands shook as he reached for it. His pa's voice echoed in his memory. "Small things survive storms, if they move fast enough." Eli yanked the pin free. The cart screamed as the wheels broke loose. It hurtled down the rail straight toward the fight. Jonas shoved Vorn aside at the last second. The cart smashed into him, carrying him headfirst into the timber supports. Wood cracked. Rock groaned. A section of the ceiling collapsed in a roar of stone. Dust exploded through the tunnel. Eli threw himself over the cradle board. The mine shuddered, coughing up rock and echoes until the noise died away into a long, trembling silence. When the dust finally settled, Jonas lay half-buried beneath the rubble, alive, but barely. Vorn was nowhere to be seen beneath the fallen rock. Eli crawled to his father's side, tears streaking tracks through the dust on his face. Jonas reached up with a trembling hand, brushing Eli's cheek. "You did good, son," he whispered. "Real good." His hand fell, his breathing shuddered, and deep in the mine, beneath the crushed timbers and ruined rails, the last echo faded like a dying heartbeat. Eli didn't look back. He lifted the cradle board, staggered to his feet, and walked toward the thinning night, because now the truth depended on a child no taller than the cradle he carried. The mine's last echo faded into the night, leaving Eli alone with the cradle board and the cold weight settling into his chest. Jonas lay still beneath the broken timbers. No more words, no more warnings, just the quiet shape of a man who'd run too long and finally run out of road. Eli touched his father's hand once, small fingers trembling, then pulled back before the grief could swallow him whole. The baby behind him whimpered, reminding him that standing still was no longer an option. He tightened the straps, wiped dust from his swollen eyes, and stepped out into the starlit desert. Dawn was still far off, but a faint silver glow touched the horizon, enough to guide him toward the only place he knew might listen to the truth. Fort Stanton. The walk stretched for miles, every step slower than the last. Eli's bare feet bled, leaving thin red marks across the hardpan. Coyotes howled in the distance, but none drew near. Maybe the scent of dust, fear, and desperation steered them away. The cradle board's weight bent him forward, but he kept going, humming that wordless river song to calm the baby each time it stirred. By the time Fort Stanton's wooden palisade rose from the desert floor, morning had clawed its way over the mountains. Sunlight made the world sharp and unforgiving. Soldiers on the wall spotted Eli first, tiny, ragged, stumbling, like a ghost child blown in from some nightmare. 2 rifles leveled down. "Stop right there," a guard barked. Eli didn't have the strength to speak. He just raised the cradle board with both hands, holding it high over his head. The gesture almost toppled him, but it worked. Murmurs rippled along the wall. The silver glint of the medallion caught the guard's eye. Another voice called down, steadier, older. "Open the gate." The fortress swallowed Eli and the child, closing behind them with a shudder. Inside, officers and soldiers gathered, whispering as they took in the dust-caked boy, with the oversized shirt flapping around his bony knees. A captain knelt in front of him, trying to look less intimidating. "Son, where'd you find that Apache infant?" Eli licked cracked lips. "Bad man threw him." "In the river?" The captain frowned. "What man?" Eli fought to form the name. Vorn, Silas Vorn. The reaction was immediate. A few soldiers stiffened. Others exchanged uneasy glances. And one officer, Lieutenant Darren Pike, went pale enough for Eli to notice. Pike forced a thin smile. "Boy doesn't know what he's saying. Maybe he got scared. Storm rattles a child's mind." But Eli wasn't looking at Pike. He was staring at the chain near Pike's hip, the same style as the one Vorn carried. A cold realization crept through him. They were connected, maybe more than connected. Before any adult could dismiss him, the baby cried. The soldiers shifted awkwardly, unsure whether to look angry or sympathetic. And then the silver medallion slid into view. Pike's composure cracked. The captain lifted the medallion, studying the mark etched into it. "This is a chief's family seal. Why would Vorn have—" He didn't finish. Boots scuffed outside the gate. Shouts followed. The doors crashed open, and half a dozen troopers staggered in, dragging a broken figure between them. Silas Vorn, bloodied, barely conscious, his coat torn and boots coated in mine dust. He raised his head and spat red onto the dirt. "You fools! That boy's got everything." Pike lunged forward, voice sharp. "Silas, shut your—" But Vorn's laugh cut him off, raw and gurgling. "You hired me, Pike. You remember? Told me to clean up that Apache family before they spread your little secret. Told me the army needed a reason to burn 'em out." Gasps rippled through the fort. Pike reached for his pistol, but 3 rifles leveled at him before he cleared the holster. The captain stepped forward, jaw locked, face grim. "Lieutenant Pike, you're relieved of duty. Drop the weapon." Pike hesitated, rage and fear twisting his expression, then tossed the gun aside and tried to run. He made it 3 steps before a trooper tackled him to the ground. Silas Vorn slumped, breath rattling. His head turned toward Eli, a cracked smile creeping over his bruised lips. "Little devil, you ruined me." Eli said nothing. He just tightened his hold on the cradle board, stepping back from Vorn's stench of blood and dust. The captain straightened. "We'll hold a tribunal. Testimonies, evidence, everything." He knelt eye level with Eli. "But son, only you can tell us what happened." Eli swallowed hard. His voice, when it came, was thin but steady. He told them about the canyon, the night chase, the mine, Jonas Caldwell's last stand. Soldiers who'd never flinched at battle shifted on their feet, some staring at the ground, others staring at Eli with a respect the boy was too tired to understand. By the time he finished, the fort felt different, quieter, heavier. The tribunal was swift. Pike was marched out in irons. Vorn died before sunset. And the baby, now safe, fed, wrapped in clean cloth, was carried by an Apache delegation that had ridden hard after sensing something stirring at the fort. One of them, a tall man with braids streaked in gray, approached Eli. "You kept our blood alive," he said softly, "and the truth." He offered Eli a carved piece of bone shaped like a lightning bolt. "A name for the child," he said. "Kenson. Lightning after rain." Eli looked at the baby, then at the horizon, where the desert stretched like an endless promise. His father was gone. The storm was gone. But something new had begun. He held the carving tight against his chest. And for the first time since the river swallowed the cradle board, Eli Caldwell let himself breathe like a child who'd survived a darkness most men never lived to tell. Stories like this linger long after the last word fades, and I'd love to know what part of Eli's journey struck you the deepest. The storm, the mine, the truth at the fort, or something quieter in between. Your thoughts help keep these frontier memories alive, carried from one campfire to the next. If you're up for it, share where you're listening from and what this tale meant to you. I'm grateful you rode the whole trail with me today, through dust, danger, and the small bravery of a child who refused to let darkness win. There's another story, waiting just beyond the next ridge, and I hope you'll join me when we ride again.